Hey, Emily.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm on my phone now, but I still can't hear it on my computer for some reason or other.
Okay. It could be the audio settings, Dick, like when you join the meeting.
Uh,
It should pop up audio settings. We can hear you, but you couldn't hear us.
well, it's because I'm talking. Yeah, I know. So, oh crap. Oh well. All right, I'll just do it on my phone. I don't know what's wrong with it.
Okay.
Can you all see the legislative webpage on my screen?
Yep.
No.
Yeah, we can.
You can? Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do is sort of take you across the top, and basically what I would do is however you all do it, whether on your phones, I almost never do it on my phone unless I'm listening, or on your laptops or hard drives. Set up a favorite link of some kind to the West Virginia Legislature, and then you can get there pretty easily. But I'm just going to walk you through the little orange line up at the top that starts Senate, House, Joint, Bill status, etc., and show you what you can find with each of those and sort of take you then through the bottom sections. So on the Senate side, and the Senate and the House side are very similar. What you really have with those two tabs are the actual individual folks. And that's helpful for those of you who go to the Capitol to be able to put a face to a name. If you go down there at all, if any of you go down and want to talk to your legislators, senators, or delegates, it's helpful to be able to pull up a list of who they are and see what they look like. And then you can also even do some background about them. So that can maybe give you some perspective, like Senator Azinger, you find out this, I think he's an insurance agent, that kind of thing. And that gives you some perspective on where they're coming through on some issues. It's not everything, because some people surprise you and they're totally different than what their profile might make them look like. But I always find that helpful. And I think that's the main thing you can get. You can also find out what committees they're assigned to. So for you all, it might be health, for example, and you want to find the senators or the delegates that are assigned to the health committees. But there are other committees like the Select Committee for Substance Use that meets once a week. And this year they have an interesting thing going where they have all Republicans and one Democrat on that committee. So it's a pretty interesting makeup. And the reason it's select is because the committee is selected by, in this case, the House Speaker. So it's not the usual division where they have a certain number of Republicans and Democrats to create some balance. With a select committee, pretty much the Speaker can pick who he or she wants to be on the committee. So that's why that one is so disproportionately Republican for whatever reason. The heading under Joint, there's some helpful stuff in there in that this is where you're going to find your information about what they call the interim committees. Interim committees are committees that of the legislature that will meet jointly. So the Senate and the House meet together in certain committee roles after the regular 60-day session is over. And what they do is they will schedule, and you can see here lower that they have right here on the screen the list of the 2022-23 interims. And these are the committees that go along with those interim sessions. And generally what interim sessions are used for is to study issues. So you have an issue that's complicated, and I would say, for example, recovery housing is one of those issues that's become fairly complicated in many respects. One of the things they might do is assign the issue of recovery housing to a study during the interims. And the advantage that gives you is it gives you resources and staff specifically to work on the issue. And generally, at least at one meeting, they will have the topic directly addressed, but there's background research that will go on a particular issue if it's important enough to the leadership throughout the interim time period. So in other words, after the 60-day session is over and until the next year's 60-day regular session begins. So that's one of the things that's important under the joint heading, is to be aware of those are the interim committees. And you can see them all there on the left, what the interim committees are. You can see their schedule. So far, we've only had the one that took place in January, and that proceeds. They have one usually every year right before the regular session. And it's sort of the closing reports that are provided by the interim committees that they're going to make. And generally, those will include a few bill recommendations, and it will have sponsors that are usually made up of the interim committees on a particular topic. So this is really just helpful, and it's helpful for background sometimes to look at. Like the one that we deal with all the time is what they call LACRA, or Health and Human Resources Accountability. And then you can see that it's basically the leadership, it's made up of the leadership and the health committee meetings of both houses, the House and the Senate. And then you can see the staff assigned to it. And then you can actually go back down here and see all the different documents and agendas that took place during the last session. So that's a good tool to have underneath your heading of joint interim committees is really important. There's some other things in here that are helpful too. It's good to know, for example, there is a budget division that does like some of the main budget resources, and you can see they have the digest basically of revenue sources by year. That can be just good background, probably less important for you than it would be for us as a state agency. There's some other things. Legislative Services, for example, is the group that does the bill drafting. And if you're ever involved with putting a bill together, there's actual formats over here under downloads where you can. I've done this when I worked at Legal Aid. I actually helped write a bill, and it's actually in statute now 20 years later, which is kind of cool. And the format for doing that, and generally what you do is you help write a bill, and then you get a sponsor to actually introduce it, and they'll have a staff person working with them, and then these folks that work under Aaron Allred to do the actual development of a draft bill. So you start with your version of the bill, it goes to a delegate or a senator who's willing to sponsor the bill for you, and then one of these folks will help, and their staff will help actually make sure that it meets all the concrete guidelines. They have very specific formats that they use for bill drafting. So that can be kind of cool to know that as well. PERD they basically are the group that does the Performance Evaluation and Research Division. They do the analysis of each state agency, small and large. They've done DHHR a couple of times since I've been here, but you can go through that if you're ever interested in seeing, this particular group we're dealing with in state government is having some challenges, and have there been any PERD reviews of them? They tend to find things that cost the state money, but they can also identify policy issues sometimes. For example, one recent one that related to us is you had multiple agencies involved with traumatic brain injuries. And so they made some recommendations about our agency and rehab services, the voc rehab people, and Medicaid, our state Medicaid agency, working together in a way that wasn't laid out in statute previously. So those kind of things can be helpful. And it's just good to know that there's some information there if you ever really want to know about how an agency works. Public information is basically, there's the membership directory, which is another tool that's available in multiple places, but that's really helpful. So especially if you have the ability to go down to the legislature and see who your legislators are, it includes things like maps of the Capitol, which can be helpful if you're trying to find. I know Emily has struggled to find rooms from time to time, and the information packet, which is further down, has even more information about the physical layout of the Capitol. Both those are very helpful tools. I don't think there's anything. I mean, it's good to check the news releases from time to time. And then you can sign up for the social media stuff, which can keep you posted if you're particularly interested in what legislators have to say about particular things. Rulemaking review, that's also under joint. It's just helpful to know that rulemaking takes place behind the scenes on a regular basis. A rule is basically, the way it works is legally, in terms of the order of priority, is you start with the Constitution. So in West Virginia, you have the West Virginia State Constitution, which I didn't study, but some of you probably did, because I didn't grow up in West Virginia. And then you go down to statute, which was the actual West Virginia Code. And underneath the West Virginia Code are what they call in West Virginia legislative rules, which is basically an agency issuing guidelines for implementing a statute, if you want to make it short and simple. And so there's an actual committee that's called the Rulemaking Committee that gets together and approves and reviews in the legislature rules that state agencies issue. They're usually very long meetings because they'll take up, for example, in our case, all of the DHHR rules in a session. It can take 8 hours or 10 hours, depending on how many questions. And on the committee is usually headed by a lawyer, or at least one of either on the Senate side or the House side, one of the lawyers. And they have a bunch of staff that deal with different issues. So if it's a criminal provision, they might have a particular somebody like Tom Smith, who's been a long time staffer for for Senate Judiciary who would advise them on criminal law. And then if it's a civil issue, they might have somebody else. If it's a health issue, they'll probably have one of the health committee attorneys assist with that. But legislative rules are really important for you all to just know and understand, simply because they are the more of the procedural and process related aspects, the day-to-day operational aspects of a statute. A statute is usually very broad. A legislative rule is usually much more specific and offers a lot more guidance, both to the agency and the people who work with the agency. And then below that, you can also have a department, depending on the department, guidelines that they can issue also, even beyond the rules. Certain things they can't do without rules, but there are all kinds of processes and procedures that are often done by department policy and procedure underneath the rule. So it's good to know that. And I should say that you find legislative rules, and I'll show you how to do that before we close out here, on the webpage of the Secretary of State. That's where you find the actual legislative rules. But this is a sort of an overview of what you get through that. And then there's other information in there related to redistricting, which is, I don't think, terribly relevant to what we're doing here today, although it does decide, who's in what district and who you're going to vote for senator and delegate. So the next line brings us over to bill status. So bill status is great because it's a good way to do a search, especially if you don't have a bill list. If you know a bill number, it's usually going to be a 4-digit number or a 3-digit number. You plug it in and it will pull up the bill. The great thing here, though, is you can also search by all bills. So you do it numerically. You can search by resolutions, which are sometimes important. A resolution is basically indicating the desire of the legislature, either one or both of the bodies, the Senate and the House, on a particular topic. And it can lead to legislative studies. It can lead to changing rules, like the issue that we all voted last year regarding property taxes related to corporations and things. That came out of stemmed from a joint resolution that passed. I often will just look at all resolutions and go through the ones that I think are applicable. A lot of them are things like naming of roads or bridges, or recognizing certain groups that are appearing before the legislature. But there's some significant policy-oriented ones in here. So it's good practice if you're monitoring the legislature for your group to check those and see if there's anything that's relevant. And you can see that, for example, HCR 46 here at the bottom is actually making a recommendation for a study. And the study will then carry over into the interims that I was talking about earlier. And that can be helpful to know. Where did that come from? Well, it came from a resolution that passed one or both bodies that recommended that the Joint Committee in this case, it's the Joint Committee on Government and Finance, study, a particular policy issue. And obviously, if you want to be involved with that, for example, if they were studying recovery housing, you would want to know that this resolution passed so that you could have some input on it and talk to the staff involved about being able to provide your input on whatever the issue is. So that can be really helpful, is to keep track of the resolutions. I think the most helpful thing is either the subject category, where you can search, and here, the subject that's sort of the default heading is bills requested by the governor. So you can look at the governor's bills, but there are all kinds of topics you can search by. So you can search by, elections. You could search by, for me, it might be health. It might be, and then they have things like, I don't think they have a mental health category. I think they do have alcohol might be on here. Alcohol, liquor, and beers would be on there. So different things that education, for example, sometimes there's education bills that affect our things. It could be human services that affect us. It could be something related to rulemaking. DHHR has a particular rules bill right now that's going through. And what they do is every session, they combine all the rules, all the disparate rules into one package. They call it a rules bundle. So there's a DHHR rules bundle, and that would help you find that if you didn't know the bill number. And anyway, it's just handy dandy to be able to do that. There are other things you can search by, like if you want to know, did something make its way over from the Senate to the House or the House to the Senate, because there's a deadline for that. You can search here and see all the bills that have passed either the House of Delegates or the Senate. And that can help you with the Passover day, where basically you can see that these are the bills that actually are going to be taken up and considered after the after the deadline passes for that. And it's a really, and then you can see, you know, the actions by governor, and the governor can either just let something pass without signing it, the governor can veto it, or the governor can actually sign it and approve it. And those are the three different, and it will tell you, you know, when it comes into effect, which is important if you're dealing with an agency in some way, and when the new rule takes place. For example, the rules that they passed related to, or the statute they passed, and then the rules related to recovery housing, when was that going to take effect in terms of, you know, state agencies not referring to recovery residences that aren't certified by WVAR and not able to provide funding to those agencies. You could check that, and that would tell you when that would be. So this is just a bit, and the other thing that's helpful, at least for us, is you can check the fiscal notes of the bills, and it's really good to see, you know, what other agencies, like we're one agency, but there's many other that provide feedback on bills that affect us, and you can find the fiscal notes by looking under the fiscal note there. A lot of times they don't get the fiscal notes in a timely way, but it can be helpful to see, like, if there's something related to, say, drunk driving or something, we could look to see what kind of fiscal note DMV gave it when we were doing the coordination of the safety and treatment programs for the DMV. So that's pretty much the value of bill status, is you can really find out pending in committee. If you know the bill number, there's no limit to what you can find out. But if you don't know the bill number, you can search by these other categories, and that can be really helpful and see the status. If, however, you want to create your own bill list, you can go to this category, which is personalized bill tracking. And anyone can do this. It's not limited to someone who does it full time like me. You just go in, you create a new account, you create yourself a password, and then you set it up, and then you sign into your list. And then for me, you will see that I have a very long list that I created specifically for our bureau, which is all the bills by topic. And just to say, you know, I'm tracking bills that are related to the agency itself. So I have bills related to state employees that would impact us, as well as bills related to mental health, substance use disorder, and to intellectual disabilities. So you'll see a big long list of things in here that is basically the core list, the one that I start with. But as the session goes on, and you have to have the crossover from the House to the Senate, and the Senate to the House, you have to create a second list. So I just call it crossover 2023 in this case, because that's the year. And you'll see that that's a much smaller list of bills that have already passed from the Senate to the House, or from the House to the Senate. And then the great thing about these lists are they're basically idiot proof. You don't have to be a law school graduate like me. If you put the bill number in on your list and it falls under the right heading, then it's going to track the bill for you. And it's going to tell you right here under the last action category where it is, right? So this one, just start with the top one, reorganizing DHHR. It's one of two bills that are really moving on separating us into three sections. So this is Senate Bill 126. That's the legal title that they gave it when it first came out. The last action was January 16th. And interestingly, the Senate did this interesting procedure where they passed a number of their bills without committee reference and without three readings on the floor. So the first day they met was January 16th, and they passed the bill that day because they waived their own rules to allow them to do that. And because they have a supermajority of one party, they can do that easily. I think there's like two, maybe Democrats, and everybody else in the Senate is Republican. So they were able to do that. Generally on the House side, though, you're going to see that it takes a bit longer for their bills to pass because they haven't been waiving the rules, and because I think there's 11 or 12 Democrats there, and there's 98 or 88, excuse me, 89 Republicans. So there's Democrats have a bit more power there. But this is basically the list that I'll track up until the end of the session. The last couple of days, I'll create another list that is classified as what they call an enrolled bill. An enrolled bill in legislative speak means that the bill has passed both bodies. It's been approved by the Senate, approved by the House, and it's gone to the governor. And any enrolled bill then is you wait to see what the governor is going to do with it. Is he going to veto it? Is he going to sign it? Or is he just going to let it become law without a signature? And they do that when there's a bill that's controversial in some way and they don't want to have their name associated with it. But they also either know they don't have the wherewithal to veto it and have the veto stand, or they just want to distance themselves in some way, they'll just let a bill pass without signing it. So that's really pretty much all there is to on the bill. Are there specific questions that anybody has about this part of it? Because this is probably the meatiest part of what we teach people about here, is how to set up a tracking list. No questions? Okay. So again, all you have to do is go back to this page, click on create a new account, pick whatever username you want, establish a password, and then plug in the bill numbers of the ones you're interested in, and this system will track them for you. It's very easy to do. It's really not as overwhelming as it looks. I know I had a lot of bills on that first page. That can be pretty overwhelming, but I'm tracking for a number. I'm tracking for people at Medicaid. I'm tracking for people in the Office of Drug Control Policy, as well as our bureau. And then we also have people who are totally focused on the personnel side of things. So we have a lot of bills in there related to DHR staff, but you all won't have to worry about that. You'll have substantive reasons for things you're tracking. So no questions on bill tracking? Okay. So let me show you the next thing up here. The next one is state law, and the one that I use the most is the West Virginia Code. And this is not as easy to use as the bill tracking because you have to do some work. But basically, this is where you actually find the state code, the official version of the state code. It used to be you had to have these big, massive books, leather-bound books, and you had to research them by, like when I was in law school, you had to check pocket parts and all kinds of things to make sure the statute hadn't been updated by a court or updated by the legislature in some form of amendment. Now it's fairly frequently updated on the website. If you were working as an attorney, there's other things you'd have to do to be able to give your client legal advice, but it's really right here, and it's very easy to use. So if you know the section of code that you're following, that you're interested in, and you want to find a bill, you just scroll down and you find it. So a lot of the stuff that we deal with, for example, is under Chapter 27. So I just go to Chapter 27, and then I can look up the parts that I'm most interested in dealing with. So if I wanted to deal with involuntary commitment, which is a big issue, right? I would just click on involuntary hospitalization, and then the code will pop open at some point. Maybe I have to click it again. And it will take you to the section that you're interested in reading, and you can read all the specific information about it. So let me try opening it again. I just didn't double click it. There you go. So then you find the subsections and you find which part you're interested in, and you just open it up, and it will. So what's the process for involuntary hospitalization? It will take you to the subsection that you're interested in reading. So if you ever really want to know what a particular statute says, and you don't have a lawyer nearby that you can ask, or a paralegal, or somebody that's comfortable with the law, this is a way you can do it yourself and see what the law. Now, what all these words mean outside of the definition sections, because lawyers love definitions. It's up to the beholder. It's in the eye of the beholder. Ultimately, the ultimate authority comes down oftentimes to courts and judges to interpret what laws mean, and hypothetically, it's supposed to be based on the plain language of the statute as opposed to implied intent. But different judges have different approaches to that. So, a word like, let's just pick one, uninsured, for example. A word like uninsured could mean different things to different people. And it may be that the agency has a definition of that. It may be that the lawyers involved in a case might have their own view of what that means. And then ultimately it ends up in court because, say, you have an insurance company and a client of an insurance company struggling with an insurance company, a judge will interpret what uninsured means under the plain meaning of the law, and there'll be case law that will come out under that. But it's helpful for all of you who aren't lawyers just to know where the state code is, because it's not hidden. It's right here for you to use if you want to use it. And certainly for somebody that's interested in very specific topics, you can find what you need to if you just check the relevant sections. You can search by subject. You can see, I've got a couple of phrases in there that you could use, like dangerous student, and it will give you some sites to the section of code that includes that phrase. So basically, keywords are how you search in here, unless you know the section, in which case you would do this. You'd put in the chapter Chapter 27, Article 2, Section 3 would be how I would do it for something in particular. In this case, Chapter 18A, Article 5, Section 1A. But you can search by keywords, and that will take you to all the statutory provisions that use that keyword. So it's just really helpful to know, and it can be some real guidance to you all when you're trying to figure out what the heck does the law say on a particular issue. You know, it's not something that you're probably going to, those of you, I assume most of you, if not all of you, are non-lawyers, nobody's going to hold you to that, but it's really good to know where that is. These other things, I don't think, I mean, there's the West Virginia Constitution if you want to see it. Acts of the legislature are basically different provisions of the code that come together to address comprehensively the code. That's probably not something you're going to have to worry about too much, but it's there if you want to. I think that's pretty much the U.S. Constitution is there if you want to see what does the Fifth Amendment say, what does the Second Amendment say. That's a popular discussion. You can go on there and read actually what the Second Amendment says. Reports, these are interesting, probably not generally terribly relevant, but you can go in there and find out reports that agencies like ours, the State Budget Office, others issue to the legislature. These are generally required reports. A lot of times they're monthly, sometimes they're annually. They're all there. You can search by agency, as you can see, and you can also search by, in some cases, they're regional groups that are out there that receive public funds in some way, and they have a responsibility because of their status to provide reports to the legislature. So that's where you would find those. It's usually not something too exciting. Grant awards, hypothetically, this would be helpful. It doesn't look to me ever when I check this like it's terribly updated. But you can search either by state agency awarding the grant, or hypothetically by the grantee, and find out what grants this agency has received from the. It's supposed to be kind of this one-stop shop where you can find out who gets grants for what. But what I have found is it doesn't get terribly well updated. So like if you look under Bureau or Senior Services, it will list the organizations, and you look under ARP, you're going to find a bunch. But if you look for something else, you're not going to find as many. And then what I see a lot is that you don't have more recent ones. So like in this one, Bureau of Senior Services agency awards, they have 350 awards, but a lot of them are not recent, right? They're 2007, 2009, things like that. So I'm not sure how well this is maintained. The auditor's office may do a better job of providing those things, but it's at least a place where you can check and see which agencies get funding for what from which agency. Performance evaluations, they call this group PERD. It's the Performance Evaluation Research Division. They do studies essentially of different groups, and you'll see that all the agencies at some point or another will have a study done. It's supposed to be an impartial study for the legislature. It's one of the reasons they attach sunset clauses, as they call them, to state agencies, so that the legislature has a chance to check in and see if there need to be modifications to the agency's purpose. Is the agency meeting what it's legislatively supposed to be doing? Is it operating within the scope of its responsibility? Are there things that could be done? I can give you an example. For DHHR, we used to be part of the broader Bureau for Behavioral Health and Health Facilities. Our health facilities are in bad need of renovation. And so there's been a back and forth between the governor and the legislature over the last, I'd say 10 years about whether we should just divest ourselves of our state operated nursing homes, or we should sink millions of dollars into modernizing them and cleaning them up. And so there was a report at the time, probably 4 or 5 years ago, and myself and the finance director went down together to the legislature to be present while the PERD folks gave a recommendation on our state facilities and what we should do. And Damon, who's our fiscal guy, actually had to go to respond to the comments because they want the agency to respond. And we basically accepted their recommendations and took them back to the cabinet secretary. And he basically made a recommendation, I believe at the time, was to sell the nursing homes. That hasn't happened. But some of the origin of that comes from some of these PERD reports where they make recommendations to the agencies. So that's what a PERD report is. And then you can search by year, you can search by agency. It includes boards, it includes all kinds of groups. So that's kind of interesting if you want to follow that kind of stuff. And then there's the other thing is there's a post-audit report done. Each of the state agencies has an audit, a financial audit done, not unlike a for-profit or nonprofit, periodically. I think it's like every 3 to 5 years you get audited. So for example, our department gets audited as a whole, and they'll look at particular issues. Like for us, most recently, they've been looking at our SOAR funding, which is our very large federal grant for opioid abuse. And so what they're trying to do is make sure that we're using and spending the money appropriately as one angle of what they're doing with the DHHR audit. But you can look at all the different audit reports from the agencies in that section. So that's pretty much the report section. The educational piece is helpful because you can get a sense of a number of things here. You can find out all kinds of things, interesting things about the Capitol itself. You can find out how to reach different people. For me, the most important thing here is the process itself. There's a whole thing in here about the legislative process and the committee process. I was a political science major as an undergraduate and an English major, so I knew about some of this stuff, but each state is different. I didn't grow up in West Virginia. So it was helpful to me when I first moved here in 1995 to get a sense of how the legislative process works here. And these have some very helpful guidelines if you want to know, like, why are they doing something with the bill? Where did that come from? You know, why was the bill on third reading all of a sudden is brought back and put on the inactive calendar, things like that. They have to follow these rules, basically. These are the constitutional rules, unless there's an exception that's created. So like the Senate created an exception when I mentioned that they could pass a bill without going to committee and without being heard 3 times by suspending the rules. So they can do that if there's enough support within it, within that body to do it. But generally, these are the guidelines. And then there are also individual rules that apply to both the House and the Senate that you can find, I think. Yes. So under the House section, if you go to House rules, you can actually see the rules that they've adopted for their 2-year session. And under the Senate section, you can find out the Senate rules that they've adopted for the 2-year session to go along with what's here under the constitutional rules that apply generally. So you have these rules that apply all the time, right? And then you have the rules that each 2-year session adopts for themselves in both the Senate and the House. So this is helpful for that purpose. You can actually order copies of the Citizen's Guide to the Legislature through here. There's a capital map that you can download and keep just so that you can navigate. That can be helpful when you're trying to find your way around the Capitol and knowing which strange committee room something is being held in. And you can get assistance. There's different links here where you can contact different people, like the lawmakers and others, for particular issues that you're working on. They have a state government directory, and then they have a link to the state agencies, et cetera. So that's helpful. I don't think there's really any, I mean, the publications page, again, I think it takes you back to pretty much the Blue Book is sort of the overview of who works within state government. They haven't done like a hard copy of that in a while. I think they're trying to save trees. So I think they're mostly virtual now, but you can go on here and find out who's in what agency and what position they have. There's some of this other stuff. I mean, the journals are here. The acts of the legislature, we saw that before. Those are helpful. The manuals, this is basically the background to who works in the legislature and what they do, sort of similar to what they have for the state agencies. And then there's the House journals. And the membership directory, as I said, is always a good thing. This is a useful thing if you're not at all familiar with the process. You can get copies of that. You can also open it on the web. It's a document, and basically see how the legislative process works. I've sent that off to folks I did when I was teaching the class at WVU to the MSWs. That was one of the things that Emily mentioned. I gave them copies of this because I think it's just useful to have a general overview, and don't assume that all of us are political science majors, but it can be helpful. I think, and then, you know, again, they have here the contact information, sort of similar to what they have over here. It's just in a more centralized place where you can go to the Senate roster, the House roster, public info, news releases. Each of the bodies will release updates on legislation and other things that they think are significant. They'll do calendars. all kinds of things that can keep you updated. If you're ever trying to figure out where something is at, it might be helpful to check this, the news release stuff. There's nothing hugely important here that I think, but it's still useful to know that it's there. The links I use pretty regularly. So like I said, one of the things I'd show you here as we got to that is that it's obviously helpful to know that what the governor is saying and doing. So you've got a link to the governor's office. You've got the AG's office here. The one I use the most is the Secretary of State, because that's where you find the state legislative rules. So if you click on Secretary of State under that link, and you can find that in separate places, you want to go to administrative law, and that's what they call the Code of State Rules. And then basically search for rules. And then there's multiple ways to do that. Generally, where I'm looking, if I'm trying to find a rule that relates to my daily business, I'm looking under health. And if you want to do a general search under health, it'll give you an idea of all the different legislative rules that fall under health. The ones that are in green there under type status are the ones that are active. The ones that are in white are historical rules, so they're older rules. Some of the older ones aren't even, they don't even have a modern corresponding bill anymore or rule anymore. But it's an easier way to move is you just focus on the green bills. And then you can search if you want to know, how to find a rule. You can search the name, you can search the code, because rules again are authorized under code references. If you know the code reference, you can search that way. If you know the name of the rule, you can search that way. You can also search that way by looking under the rules if you know which particular one it applies to. And you can see there's a lot of rules, right? And you can search also if you know. So for me, a lot of times the rules are going to be 64 Code of State rules and then a different number. So generally, I'm going to look within the 64 provisions, and it's going to be a particular rule. So I know that 64 CSR 59, for example, is a rule that applies to state-operated mental health facilities. I used to run the advocacy program at Legal Aid. I had to use this rule on a regular basis. This is what a rule looks like. And it will tell you basically what the rights are of patients at state-operated mental health facilities. So for about 10 years, I used this rule as sort of the underlying basis for our authority as behavioral health advocates. But this is sort of the context of what a rule looks like. It gives you the scope. It gives you the code reference with 2759G. That's the authority, the rules, and it tells you how recently it's been updated. You can see that it was updated in 2021. So it's a newer version than the one I used back in the 2000s, early 2000s. And then it goes into the very specifics, and then you would search it by section, but the one that you're most interested in. So, the definitions are always very helpful in these rules. And then once you know the definition, you can move the section that covers the definition in some way and find what you need. But legislative rules are incredibly important because they're much more specific than statutes are. And they are going to give you more information about different situations that you want to understand. So Emily can tell you that there is a recovery residence rule that followed under the statute for recovery residences. And you can find that rule online there as well. In terms of the links, I think that's the big one, but you can see that there's links to all the different boards and commissions and colleges and cabinet level agencies. So like our agency is here. And then for us, you just go, you scroll down to the bottom, and we fall down here. We're next to Office of Drug Control Policy and all that. And then this is our website. So you can find pretty much most of the state agencies, but this is the Department of Health and Human Resources one there. And that can be helpful because we post a lot of information, as does Medicaid, for example. You can find all their policies and procedures. I use that a lot. But the links are really helpful for that purpose. Okay, let's go back to the beginning here. So we've done all the way across. Are there any questions about anything up here before I move down? I know I'm talking fast. Everybody okay? Okay. So let's start with this. So this blue box here, there are 4 blue boxes at the bottom, or purple. I'm a little colorblind, so sort of bluish purple. This takes you to where you can actually listen to and or watch the legislature in action. So Friday, what they've been doing this session in 2023 is on Fridays, they've been holding the floor sessions. Usually the floor sessions are held at 11 o'clock, and they have meetings Monday through Thursday. They have meetings before and after the floor sessions. And there's sort of a rhythm to it, and there's a schedule. Like the health meetings on the House side have been at 3 o'clock on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The Senate health meetings have been on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 o'clock. And then the select committee for substance use has been Tuesday at 9 this year. But on Fridays, what they've been doing is having the floor sessions. And the floor session is where they take up a bill that's already finished the committee process. And they have, like I said, they have to read it 3 times. And so you can actually watch the floor session by clicking video for either one of those. So you can watch the House in action by clicking on that. And if they were meeting, it would take you to that. You can see they're adjourned until 11 o'clock Monday. But that's all you have to do to watch them. And then on the Senate, you do the same thing where you click on the Senate. And then again, they're adjourned until 11 o'clock on Monday. Even though Monday's a holiday, they still will meet. I think it's President's Day. The cool thing about this, though, is at least on the Senate side, they really only have 2 committee meeting rooms outside of their chamber. There's a lot less of them, 30 something of them instead of 100. So they have 2 main rooms. And by clicking on these rooms, you can actually watch the rooms, watch the meetings in the rooms. You don't have to just listen to them. And they're one's for finance and one's for judiciary, but they use the rooms for multiple purposes. So you'll often find other committees like health meeting in one of the other rooms. But you can also, on the Senate side, go back and look under archive video and actually watch and listen to Senate meetings that took place, within the last week or so. So say I missed the Senate health meeting on Thursday, I could click it and then watch it here, just because they record them. And usually it doesn't start, meetings don't start right away. So you probably have to scroll down a bit before they start the meeting. But when you get there, you'll be able to both see and watch it, which I at least find helpful. The ability to listen to it only, I find limiting because I don't always know who's talking. They must have started really late for this meeting. Here we go. It's Dr. Maroney, who's the chair. So that's really cool that you can do that. And you can see that they basically have both the floor sessions and the committee meetings all laid out there. I don't know how long they keep them for. I've never gone back and checked that. But if there's a meeting that took place during the week and you're interested in going back and seeing it, like there might be a bill that took place this afternoon after the floor session in Senate Judiciary, you can go there and watch it. So that's really helpful, at least for me. With the House, they neither have cameras and they don't archive anything. So if you don't see it, as far as I know, there's no way to actually recreate that. They don't record their floor sessions, at least to my knowledge. I don't know that there's an archive for them, and they don't record their committee meetings. So all you can really do is click on the box for the House ones and then listen to them. It would be great if the House were willing to go to cameras and archives, but for whatever reason, they've chosen not to do that. So, if you have issues with that, let your local legislator know, and maybe they'll listen to you. Probably not, because I think it's a leadership issue, and I don't know if it's money or transparency or what the limitation is on the House side. The Senate's been doing it for about 10 years now, and I find it incredibly helpful to be able to see people when they're talking so that I can better understand them. So that's the streaming and audio video. This section here is just basically sort of focuses on particular issues. Sometimes I look at this, most of the time, unless it's a bill that I'm particularly interested in, I'm not. It just is sort of a highlight of different committee bills that have passed, 4 sessions that have passed. There's one for you. House updates Patient Brokering Act, right? So that's something that obviously you guys would care about, but you can see all it's really doing is today the House passed Senate Bill 241, which gives the Inspector General authority to receive and investigate complaints of patient brokering. It's not a lot of information, but it does allow you to click on the bill number. So you can go in and what you want to check. In this case, you want to check the enrolled bill, which, as I said, is a bill that's passed both the House and the Senate. You can see what the final language looks like. What you get in an enrolled bill, by the way, is it doesn't have any of the strike or underlining stuff. So you're getting the complete version of the final bill that's going to the governor. And that's what it will look like. in order to see actually what was amended in the bill, you have to go back and look at the introduced version that has the strike and underlining stuff like here. And that's all it really did, was give OFLAC the authority to investigate patient brokering. And sometimes before the final bill, you may want to look at like the floor amendments and things like that. So you can see this is probably a title amendment. That's all it is. A title means basically the title has to capture what the purpose of the bill is. So sometimes when they amend a bill, they also have to change the title. So what you hear a lot on the floor session is, you know, that the chair is recommending that there's a title amendment, and almost never does it get questioned, because all it is basically in a sentence or two summarizing the purpose of the bill. The content of the bill is what gets debated much more hotly rather than the title. But the title tells you essentially what's in the bill, at least it's supposed to. So that's kind of what I use that for. It's just if there's a bill that's interesting to me and I'm trying to follow out, like, and I missed the House session discussion of it, it's helpful just to be able to see the little blurb they have on it, and it takes you to the latest version of the bill, which can be useful as well. So the bulletin board page is the one that I use the most on the bottom line. And this is where you can find the most content. There's a number of things that you can use here, starting with at the top of both the Senate and House records. They will tell you the bills that are going to be introduced on a particular day. So the House is already past their own deadline that they've imposed. It's their constitutional deadline for introducing bills. The House won't introduce any new bills that aren't originating from a committee or are related to the budget. So there won't be any bills that are not resolutions. So the last time you'll see for the House will be Tuesday, because that was their deadline for new bills. The only thing that you'll generally see under bills to be introduced are resolutions sometimes. So here's a concurrent list of concurrent resolutions that are listed that will still be posted on a daily basis. But the House is pretty much done for this. The Senate is continuing until Monday or Tuesday, I can't remember the day, to introduce bills. I think it's Tuesday. So you will continue to see, there will be another one that comes out probably over the weekend that will list it, probably say Monday, and then the date, 20th, I guess, of the bills that are being introduced. Usually the last day they cram in a bunch of bills. But the thing about the bills that are introduced towards the end of their ability to introduce them is they don't have a lot of time to go through the complete process. So unless they're just going to waive the rules, like the Senate did, excuse me, at the beginning of the session, most of the bills that get introduced at this point in time aren't going to go anywhere. It could be a highlight for next year, but it's useful. For some reason, I swallowed something. To be able to know what the topics are anyway. I always add them to my list, but then, you know, you probably won't hear much about it until the following year because it got introduced so late in the session. The other topics that are useful here are, as I said, House resolutions to be introduced, because the House breaks them out with the Senate. The Senate includes under Senate bills to be introduced both bills and resolutions. So you can see down here, these are resolutions. U.S. Army, Sergeant James Arnold Browning Memorial Bridge. I mean, those are all resolutions, but they put all of that under the category of Senate bills to be introduced, whereas the House just lists bills, and then they have a separate box to click on for their resolutions. So they don't include them all together. So it's good to know that. Other things that are helpful to know. So if you want to know what's going to happen during a floor session on a given day, for the House, what you want to do is click on what they call their special calendar. Those are the active bills. I don't know why it's called. It must be in the Constitution that the special calendar is the one they use. But this will tell you basically what bills are going to be taken up on Monday. This is the list. So when they have their floor session, if any of you have watched the floor sessions of the House or the Senate, you know there's a whole process they go through where the President, the Senator, the Speaker of the House goes down a list of certain things. Are there messages from the governor? Are there messages from the Senate? Are there visitors to be introduced? All this stuff. They do the Pledge of Allegiance. They do a prayer. I mean, all this. And then eventually they get to bills on third reading. And bills on third reading are the bills that are in the passage phase. So the way that it starts is bills first go to the floor. They're on first reading, which means they've made it out of a committee. or committees, oftentimes committees. They often will go to like Judiciary and Finance, for example. That's not uncommon. So they address the legal aspects of a bill and they'll address the financial aspects of a bill. So once they've completed the committee work, they've gone through the 1 or 2 or 3 committees, they will go to the floor and they will go under first reading. The bill will be read by the staff. Basically, the speaker will basically give everybody notice that the bill is being converted over to second reading. And all they do basically is what you see here. They'll say House Bill 2827, make public charter schools eligible for safe school funds. Then that's all that happens on first reading. They go through them all unless there's some kind of problem with it or something, some snag of some kind. That's all that happens with bills on first reading. Bills on second reading, like here, Campus Self-Defense Act, these are the bills that are on what they call the amendment phase. So generally, second reading the second day, unless they waive the rules and do it all in one day, again, like the Senate did at the beginning of the session, is the time where legislators will introduce either from the floor or elsewhere from the committee that's going from the floor to amend the bill in some way. So if there's a particularly egregious provision that somebody doesn't like. So here, for us, the one we're monitoring is the committee substitute. That's what ComSub stands for, is a committee substitute, which means a committee amended the bill from the original language of the bill. So they call it a committee substitute for House Bill 2498 to require medication-assisted treatment programs to have written policies concerning community relations. Well, if, say, Delegate Pushkin wanted to amend this bill because he was concerned there was something in here that was going to discourage treatment or something, because he's a big proponent for access to treatment, second reading might be where he would stand on the floor and basically the staff would announce that there's an amendment. He would explain the amendment, and then there would be discussion. There's always discussion allowed. And then at that point, they will vote on the bill up or down to have it amended. So second reading is generally where from the floor, particularly for people who aren't on a committee. So if you're not assigned, like Emily's friend Kayla, who's not on a lot of health committee work, wants to amend this bill because she wasn't on House Health, she could amend the bill from the floor when it's on second reading. Generally, what they do is they'll have told the staff and given the speaker's staff notice that they have an amendment pending, and then the clerk, the House clerk, will read the amendment and then ask the sponsor of the amendment to explain it. So Kayla would explain her amendment on the floor during second reading. I'll be out in a few minutes. Thanks, Nikki. So basically, the final phase is third reading, which is the passage phase. So it is not all that unusual for the speaker to ask approval to move the amendment phase to third reading. So that's not unusual that it happens. Generally, third reading is where you're going to find the most detailed discussion of a bill and some of the issues that might relate to it, because it will include the sponsor who will stand up and speak to the bill, or the chair, the chair of the committee that the bill was assigned to initially, who will be asked to explain it. People will stand up and ask questions if it's a controversial bill. I suspect, for example, when campus self-defense goes to the floor, there are going to be a number of people that ask questions about that bill. It's basically allowing college students and professors to carry guns. And so that will be where the bulk of the discussion is going to take place on third reading. Doesn't always guarantee that the amendment phase is done on second reading. Done again, though, because the Speaker of the House can defer that to third reading if nobody objects to it. So campus self-defense, I don't know if they will deal with the amendment phase on Monday, but the discussion amendment phase could be waived to third reading. The other thing they can do, which is not unusual, they will pull a bill from the special list to the and put it on the inactive list. So the House calendar section is the phase where basically bills get pulled to sit until they get parked there until they're ready to go back on the special calendar. So you'll see, for example, of some concern for us, is the committee substitute for House Bill 2196 to remove opioid treatment programs from requiring a certificate of need, has been placed in the House calendar, which means something's happening, negotiating in some way. That's the clause that the bill that would basically lift the moratorium from opioid treatment programs, from methadone centers, methadone clinics, which we think is really important that they do, but for some reason it's being parked in second reading on the regular House calendar. So this, just think of this as like the inactive phase of the section. I'm trying to think, is there anything else so you can get a list of all kinds of things up here. Here's I already showed you that one, resolutions to be. The abstract is sort of the summary of what happened with each bill. And by committee, it's sort of a general overview. So you're trying to get more of a narrative overview of what's happened with bills. That's not a bad thing to check. It gets updated pretty much every day. The last day takes a while before they get that updated. There's the topical index, which covers basically, it's sort of like searching for a bill. It will show you much more concretely the list of all the bills by category. So like crime is a huge one. Economic development is a huge one. And then there's smaller ones like just education on its own that are there too. So you can search by topic, and if you didn't get a bill number, this is yet another way to try to figure out, in addition to the bill search section, where a bill falls and what its bill number is. The committee schedule, that can be very helpful to know. There's multiple ways, as I showed you here, to find out when a committee's meeting. I'll go back and do that briefly, but this is one way to do that. This is the scheduled committee meetings for Monday. They do that for both the House and the Senate. So you see they don't have they have Senate military meeting 1 p.m. There are probably other meetings going to take place on Monday. They often don't have their full list up until the morning of the day in question, but that could be really helpful. And then the Senate Journal is the very detailed list of everything that happened during a particular day. Probably not something you guys will have to use. I think a couple of times I've used it, but it can give you an overview of the action, both in committees on the floor, of what happened during a particular day. Let me just show you that before I forget. I think this is probably the last big thing. This is under Senate and House is also where you find all the committee meetings. So you can find out, for example, Health and Human Resources. You can see the agenda there for yesterday. They usually don't post the meetings until like at least the day before. Some of them are very thorough and do it early, like finance is really organized and they do that early, but health tends to be sort of the day before or the day of they post. You can see the substance abuse select committee is here. They don't have anything for next week yet, but that's the one they ended up doing late in the day on Tuesday. Usually it's at 9 o'clock, but they met later because I think they had to struggle with whether they were going to meet at all because they didn't announce the meeting. They have an analogous list on the Senate side. So if you're following Senate, you want to see what meetings they're going to have. And then the other nice thing is you can click on each of these bills and actually read the bill that they're taking up. So if there's multiple versions of a bill, that can help you see which bill is being debated and how. Any questions on this section? You're all being very quiet. Hope you're all alive.
We're alive.
Okay, good to know. And then you have the redistricting again. I mean, I don't think for the most part you're going to care about that. And then these are just down here, other links to do the same things that are up here. You can go in and like live will take you to the page that has all the committee meetings. These are just sort of duplicative places so you don't, if you forget where you're on. What I always do is if I'm deep into this somewhere and I want to get back to the homepage, I just click the Capitol insignia there on the top on the right, and that takes you home. I think that's all I got. Anything else you all have questions about? Anything I can help with that I missed or?
No, this has been very informational. This is Dick Doherty, and
Hi, Dick.
appreciate everything you've shared with us.
No problem.
I was a question about the suspended rules in the Senate versus the House not doing it. So the House has a super majority, so they chose to suspend the rules. They could, correct?
Correct. If they would have a little bit, they would have a little bit of a harder time because theoretically there's more Ds than there are in the Senate side. I think they might have 12. So it's 88 to 12. But they could still get I don't remember if it's 2/3, whatever they need to vote to suspend the rules if they wanted to. But I think there's a different philosophy. I think the approach of the Senate, as I heard it, was the bills that they passed on the first day and waived the rules for in regard to committee meetings and 3 days of readings were all bills. I think the Senate president said that they'd passed the previous year. So what they were trying to do was conserve their energy and time for bills that hadn't been taken up before or hadn't been considered before. That was at least, I think, the public explanation.
So when they do suspend the rules, though, then there's no way to, like a judiciary chairman or a chairman of a committee where a bill might get referenced, they can't not put it on the agenda or whatever to stop it, or there's no brakes on it then, right? I mean, they just go straight up.
Theoretically, the chairs of the committees are part of the leadership. So there are meetings that take place. Like in the House, they actually publicize, they have a committee, they call it the Rules Committee, that meets about 15 minutes before the floor session starts at 11 usually. And you can actually listen to the Rules Committee, and the Rules Committee basically meets behind the House meeting room there, the House floor, and the Speaker presides, and the chairs of the committees, and then the minority leaders are there, and they can object to certain things being done. So I assume they have something equivalent on the House side, on the Senate side. But pretty much if the leadership wants to do something, that will often include the chairs of those committees you were referencing. So they'll know in advance that essentially it's not going to committee, it's going directly to the floor. So the only venue for a legislator, because the public would have no feedback at all then, right? You're cutting out the committees, you're cutting out the committee meetings. And so the only venue would be to speak from the floor. So if you're a Democrat, for example, and you didn't agree with those particular bills skipping all those rules, the only opportunity you would have would be to stand up on the floor and object. And obviously, if the leadership, where you have almost all Republicans and 2 or 3 Democrats, they're not going to prevail. So yeah, there's no real, that's the downside, is there's no feedback. There's no stakeholder feedback. There's no vetting by the 2 or 3 committees that a bill is usually assigned to, and you're moving stuff right to passage right away. You miss all of that. But their argument is they discussed it last year, nothing's changed. We're just going to get it out of the way so we can deal with new issues, or the issues that matter. Obviously, a lot of the focus has been on taxes for them and the budget and stuff. And so they didn't want to get bogged down with things they thought were repetitive. I guess that's the way they saw it.
Right. So the crossover day that they talk about now too is when that's the last day a bill can go from one house, one chamber.
That's right.
And so the amended bill goes to the other house, and then they vote it up or down, right?
They bring it to the floor, and it goes through the process of the 3 readings. So here's the calendar, and you can see that here is the 14th is the day, and it's referenced over here, right? The last day is to introduce the bills in the House. The 20th is the last day to introduce, so it's actually Monday, not Tuesday, to introduce bills in the Senate. And then you have the 26th, which is bills are due out of committee in the House of Origin to ensure 3 full days of reading, because you're getting towards the end of the session, right? And then you have the last day to consider a bill on 3rd reading in the House of Origin, which is the 1st. And then the 11th is the 60th day, and that ends at midnight. So basically a bill that's not read 3 times and approved by both bodies by midnight on the 11th of March is done, unless they hold a special session.
Right. Okay. So you have to worry about it until March 1st, usually.
Well,
if something happens.
11th.
Yeah, I mean, they have little parliamentary procedures they can pull to pull bills out of that look like they're dead. Don't forget, there is the exception for bills that are originating in committee. So sometimes that can happen. And all of a sudden you might have a bill that just comes out of nowhere that hasn't been taken up or discussed, but it might go right to the floor from the Committee of Origin. and then somehow fly through at the last minute. And then, as I said, bills that are related to the budget, as it says, I think what they say here is, or supplementary appropriation bills. So you can have those. And then, of course, resolutions and concurrent resolutions also are exceptions. So a lot of times what they'll do is they'll use a resolution for a bill that they really would like to get through. And then, and again, as I said earlier, that usually leads to a study of some kind. And the study will lead to new language for a bill coming during the next regular session. A special session, I should say, is a time where basically the governor calls the legislature back into session to specifically take up legislation. The interims are discussions of legislation, but they don't vote. They don't do business in the way that they would during the 60-day session. But a special session, and the governor basically defines the scope of a special session. So he will say that he wants to, or she, if we ever have a she, would say that we're going to take up, particular bill, or we're going to take up a particular topic. It could be a budget issue, that kind of thing. They often have used special session to extend the regular session to deal with the budget issues. But in recent years, since the Republicans have taken over, there haven't been as many of those. The Democrats used to go, very late into April sometimes, or even May, with special sessions to deal with budget issues. But that hasn't happened as much lately.
Right. Well, it's all been so a freshman delegate that didn't take political science, he needs to be there 3 terms before he doesn't get hoodooed on all this stuff. Probably learn it. I mean, it'd be a learning curve, it seems like.
Yeah. It's a steep learning curve. It's generally recommended, as I understand it from friends of mine that have been in the legislature, that it's best to listen the first couple of years and follow the process. Obviously, everybody has their own passions, so there are going to be people that jump in with both feet and bring. But the problem often, if the person isn't viewed as being respectful of leadership, that can make it more. There are lots of ways to make it hard on a newcomer, I guess is what I'm saying. That the speaker and the Senate president can basically do a whole lot to impact the health of any bill that you're interested in, depending on how they view you. I mean, they can agree with you on the issue substantively, but may not like you personally, and that still might be a challenge. I've seen it happen.
All right. Well, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
So for everybody else, I did put a list of bills that I'm specifically tracking. My dad's list is substantially longer than mine. This is not all encompassing of all SUD or even recovery related bills. These are just the ones that specifically do relate. As I said earlier, I know, Dad, you were a little late, but what they've done is I think partially out of confusion and sometimes purposefully, is instead of explicitly stating treatment or recovery residents, they're kind of using broader language like residential SUD services. And that creates a little bit of ambiguity about, who the bill applies to and who it doesn't. And so there's been one bill, for example, which is a licensing bill, where in one side of the legislature, in the Senate side, recovery residences were explicitly exempted from that bill. Whereas I think on the other side, the intention was that it includes recovery residences. So there's been some confusion with that. And that's why I include ones that don't explicitly say recovery residences, just because there's still bills to watch, because we're not really sure. It's anybody's guess what they'll actually do with them, inevitably. So there's a few, and the tax credit bill was new for me. That was just on the agenda on the rescheduled meeting on Tuesday. So that wasn't on my original list. There's also a bill about patient brokering. Dad, I don't know if you know the number of that one off the top of your head.
That was one of the ones on the list that's actually made its way all the way through. The one with OFLAC.
Yeah.
That just basically gives OFLAC this, and I heard your friend Delegate Pushkin explaining last night on the legislature today that the reason that they're pushing that is because there was the perception that the Attorney General's office and the Medicaid fraud unit would handle that issue. And he and others apparently don't feel that that's being handled by the Attorney General. So they're wanting to give the authority to enforce that to OFLAC.
So I'll add that one too. So what we'll do is we'll send out this recording after it downloads. It will take a little bit of time. And I'll send out a list of bills specifically that I think are relevant. And then, you know, he showed you a lot of ways to get in there and find your own and track your own, and go from there. So does anybody have any other questions?
Just a comment. So thank you very much for coming on and presenting for a person that is new in the advocacy realm. I know this is going to be a really good tool to teach folks and to help folks see, you know, the things that they're concerned about, where they are in the process and how the process works a little more in depth than, you know, maybe just a general advocacy session. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing the knowledge.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to help. And the thing I would say to you is don't be afraid to use it. It's as I said, it's really idiot proof. Once you put if you put the right bill number in your tracking list, the system will do all the work for you. And if you do that and you create the bills that you're particularly interested in, the subset of issues, you know, whether it's recovery residences or something else, you can track it for yourself. You don't have to show it to anybody else. Learn from using it. And once you start using it and you start following the process, there are guidelines and there are reasons for why they're doing those things. You'll start to figure it out and you'll become more comfortable with it. It's really, they've done us all a favor in creating this website in the way that they've set it up. I'd like to see the video and the archive portions on the House side too, because that would make all of our lives easier. But I think what they've got in place now, I mean, compared to when I came here a long time ago, 1995, they've come a long way with this and they've really made it accessible for a lot of us. So I hope that helps. It's great to meet you all virtually, and good luck. Let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.